Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Welcome all to today's reading from Brilliant as the Sun, a retelling of Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Divine Protection. We're reading from chapter 14 today, King Chitraketu's Grief. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langayate girim yat kripa tamham vande Shri Gurum Dinatarinam Paramananda Madhavam Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram Hari Om Tat Sat. Verses 1 and 2. Parikshit frowned in confusion. How could Vritra have developed such pure devotion to Krishna? Why too was he inimical to Indra if he was a devotee? He said, O Shukadev, learned Brahmin, Vritra was born in the Danav race. The modes of passion and ignorance govern Danavs, and they are therefore sinful. How is it that Vritra, though born in that race, had such great love for Lord Narayan? Even the gods who are in the mode of goodness, as well as saints liberated from nature's modes, rarely exhibit such pure love for the Lord. Verse 3. Living entities in the material world are as numerous as atoms. Only a few are in human bodies, and among them, very few are interested in following religious principles. Verse 4. Among those who follow religious principles, only a few seek liberation from the material bondage, and fewer still attain it. Those who achieve liberation give up attachment to society, friendship, love, country, home, wife, and children. Out of many such liberated souls, only one enters the spiritual sky. Verse 5. Great sage, among many millions of souls who have entered the spiritual sky, it is very unusual to find a devotee of Lord Narayan. Such fully peaceful devotees are extremely rare. Verses 6 and 7. How then did a sinful demon like Vritrasur, whose only business was to give others trouble, attain such a rare standard of devotion? O Master, I desire to hear more about Vritra, whose heroism in battle impressed even Indra. Verses 8 and 9. Shukadev said, My dear king, please listen attentively to the history I am about to tell you. Vyasadev, Narad and Devala Rishis confirmed this account. Verse 10. King Chitraketu sat upon his throne, his bowed head held in his hands. His chief minister leaned toward him. Your Majesty appears worried. The king sighed. I am deeply troubled, my lord. Why? You rule the entire earth. Under your dominion, she provides all our necessities. What could disturb you? Verse 11, I have no heir, replied Chitraketu disconsolately. All of my wives are barren, it seems. Verses 12 and 13. Lord, you are handsome, youthful, of high character. You belong to a noble family, are well educated, wealthy, and powerful. Surely you can find a wife who can bear you children. I have already married many wives, yet still I remain without issue. They are all beautiful with alluring eyes, but neither they nor my vast kingdom and wealth can give me happiness while I remain without an heir. Verses 14 and 15. The court herald entered and announced, Sage Angira. Chitraketu rose from his throne and hurried towards to greet the sage. His court Brahmins fetched flower garlands, water for bathing the sage's feet, and paraphernalia for worshipping him. Servants followed with drinking water and a variety of delicacies. Chitraketu touched Angira's feet. Your Holiness, you honor us with your presence. He respectfully led the sage to his throne and invited him to sit. Then he garlanded him, washed his feet, and offered him formal worship. So this is the etiquette to greet a sage. When the ceremony was complete, the king served him water and a variety of food choices. The sage ate separately and a variety of choice foods. The sage ate sparely and then sat back with a smile as a servant brought water for him to wash his hands and mouth. Chitraketu sat on the ground by the sage's feet. Verses 16 to 17. Seeing the king with his head bowed, sage Angira smiled in great pleasure. I applaud you for your humility and hospitality, he said. Chitraketu pressed his hands together. I am your servant. For several months, Angira gazed at Chitraketu. Several moments, not months. Despite the king's external show of happiness, the sage detected his inner turmoil. Tell me, dear king, are your body, mind, and associates well? Just as the body's welfare depends on the health of the 7 elements constituting it, similarly the king's welfare depends on 7 factors. Chitraketu looked up. I understand the elements on which the body depends are the total material energy, the 5 sense objects, and the self, but pray tell me the 7 things on which the king depends. Chitraketu knew well what they were, but he humbly listened as the sage spoke. Angira said, his guru, his ministers, his kingdom, his fort, his treasury, his royal commands, and his friends protect a king. Verse 18, a king who accepts good counsel from his ministers is happy, and they too are pleased when they offer him their service and gifts. Chitraketu folded his palms. All is well in these respects, my lord. Angira could sense something was wrong. He probed further. Verse 19, what of your wise citizens, secretaries, servants, and the merchants who sell spices and oil? Do they all follow your ordinances? Yes, my lord. And your ministers, courtiers, provincial governors, sons, and other dependents, are they all obedient to you? Yes, my lord. Verse 20, how about your mind, dear king? Only a ruler who has controlled his mind can truly control his citizens. Chitraketu lowered his gaze. Verses 21 and 22. My dear King Chitraketu, I can see your mind is disturbed. It seems you are frustrated. Is this for a fault of your own, or is it caused by others? Chitraketu remained downcast. You are anxious about something, your face is pale and withered. There is no point denying it. Clearly there is a problem. With his head lowered in humility, Chitraketu revealed his mind. Verses 23 and 24. O great sage Angira, because of your austerities, knowledge, and absorption in the Supreme Lord, you are free of all sinful reactions. You are a perfect yogi and can understand everything about conditioned souls like me. Although you already know my situation, since you ask, I will tell you what troubles me. Verse 25. Even the gods envy my wealth and kingdom, yet nothing gives me any pleasure. Just as flower garlands and sandalwood pulp do not satisfy a starving, thirsty person, none of my possessions give me pleasure, for I have no son. Verse 26. Kneeling at the sage's feet, Chitraketu wrung his hands. With no son, there would be no one to make the sacred offerings of Pinda for him and his ancestors. The king looked up at Angira and implored, O great sage, please save me and my forefathers, who are surely descending into hell because I have no progeny. Please do something that I may have a son who will deliver us from hellish conditions. Verse 27. Angira looked compassionately at the forlorn king. Great Emperor, I, the mind-born son of Lord Brahma, will certainly help you. Tell your cooks to prepare sweet rice and bring here. I will offer it to the powerful progenitor, Twashta. So immediately the king gave the order. As the cooks prepared the dish, the court Brahmins ignited a sacrificial fire. Angira fed the flames with clarified butter and uttered the mantras to Twashta over the pot of sweet rice. Verse 28. When the sacrifice was complete, he told King Chitraketu, summon from among your many wives she who is most charming and pleasing to you. Chitraketu turned to his chief minister. Go immediately to Queen Kritadyuti's palace, tell her I wish her to come here now. When the queen Kritadyuti arrived, sage Angira gave her the pot. Blessed lady, eat this sweet rice. She touched the sage's feet and taking the sanctified food sat down to eat it. Verse 29, Angira then turned to Chitraketu, O great king, you will soon have a son. Chitraketu was beside himself with joy. The entire court began cheering in happiness. With happiness, Angira held up a hand to quieten them. You should name the child Harsha Shoka, he said. The sage then disappeared. So this name is significant, Harsha and Shok. So this should be the name of the child, the sage told the king. Chitraketu looked quizzically at his chief minister. What a strange name. Harsh means happiness and Shoka means lamentation. The sage must mean that just as he brings me joy, he will also give me misery. It must be that in the future he will be very proud of his great wealth and an empire and will not be submissive to me. Thus I will suffer grief because of my son's disobedience. So be it. I am prepared to tolerate this. Better to have a disobedient son than no son at all. Verse 30 to 31. Thinking nothing more of the unusual name, Chitraketu offered his arm to Kritadyuti and accompanied her to her palace. After they conceived, the queen's womb gradually grew like the moon during the bright fortnight. Verses 32 to 35. In due course, a son was born. Heralds went throughout the kingdom of Surasena to inform the citizens. There were huge street celebrations and leaders from the different communities went to the palace with gifts. King Chitraketu bathed and decorated, accompanied the court Brahmins to the birthing room to perform the baby's first rites and to offer him blessings. When the ceremony was complete, he gave the Brahmins gold, silver, garments, ornaments, villages, horses and elephants along with 600 million cows. Then he ordered that charity be given to every citizen on behalf of his newborn son. He told his ministers, give to everyone satisfaction. In this way, may the reputation, opulence and longevity of my son increase. Verse 36, over the coming months, Chitraketu ceaselessly doted on Kritadyuti and their son. Embracing her to his heart, he would say, when a poor man suddenly attains riches, his appreciation for the wealth increases daily. O beloved, I feel like this toward our son. Verse 37 to 41, having become the object of her husband's special affection, the mother of the future king, Kritadyuti happily spent her days and nights nursing her son and overseeing every detail of his care. The other wives, however, became increasingly unhappy. Just see, said one, how the king only has eyes for Kritadyuti and her son. He barely even notices us at all. What can we expect, said another. A husband neglects a wife who has no sons and her co-wives dishonor her. Exactly. Like a maidservant, certainly we are suffering because of our past sins. Even the king's maids are happy, for he treats them better than us. Such is our great misfortune. Verses 42 and 43. Neglected by the husband, the other queens' envy of Kritadyuti and her son increased day by day. Finally, as they sat bemoaning their situation to one another, they hatched a plot. I cannot tolerate this anymore, said one. Just see how Kritadyuti revels in her fortune while we all suffer. I wish I could wipe the smirk off her face, said another. Sister, said a third, it is not intelligent to wish ill to another. Intelligent or not, I no longer care. The king's neglect has made my heart as hard as a stone. What can we do? I think we should kill the boy, said the one who had spoken first. The others looked at her in silence. She was right. It was the only way to restore their previous positions. After consulting together, they decided on a plan. That night, they distracted the child's nurse and poisoned the boy's milk. Verses 44 and 45. The next morning, Queen Kritadyuti rose, bathed and decorated herself as usual. Unaware that her son was dead, she began her morning prayers, happily waiting for the nurse to fetch him to her. The normal time for him to be brought to her came and went. Wondering where he was, she sent her maidservants to his room. "He's sleeping for a long time," she said. "My dear friend, please wake him up and bring him here." She hurried to his quarters, but his nurse and guard stopped her. "The prince is sleeping. Please come later." She showed them a handwritten note by the queen commanding that the prince be woken and brought to her. The nurse immediately entered the prince's room. Verse 46, she said, "O prince, please rise. Your mother requests your presence." There was no reply. The nurse drew open the curtains and let in the light. She turned to again call him. He was lying on his back with his eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. "Dear child, please rise." There was no reply, no movement. A sense of foreboding seized the nurse. She slowly approached the prince's bed. He seemed not to be breathing. She touched his skin. It was cold. Overcome with panic, she shook his shoulders. Prince, wake up." There was no response. The terrible realization that the boy was dead overcame her. Falling to the ground, she shrieked, "I am doomed." Verses 47 to 49. The guards opened the door, and saw the nurse crumple to the ground by the prince's bed. She beat her breast with both hands and lamented loudly, "I wish I had never lived to see this day." Hearing her loud wails, Queen Kritadyuti hurried to the boy's room. Seeing him lying dead, she collapsed unconscious, her hair and dress in disarray. The distraught guards raised the alarm. Soon male and female courtiers were crowding the room and corridors, wailing loudly. The other queens who had administered the poison also came and feigned grief. Verses 50 to 51. Chitraketu sat in his room attending to the state matters. A servant came and whispered to a guard, who then hurried to the chief minister and gave the message. The minister's face went pale. Then he reeled with the shock. Chitraketu said, "What is the matter?" "Your Majesty," said the minister, "I can barely bring myself to repeat this news." A morbid fear seized the king's heart. "Speak up, man. Have we been invaded? Is there some conspiracy against the crown?" "My lord," stuttered the minister, "the prince is dead." Chitraketu leapt to his feet. "How? What happened?" "No one knows, lord. They found him dead in his cot." Chitraketu collapsed, tears streaming down his face, his heart on fire with grief and barely able to see where he was going because of his tears. He stumbled toward his son's quarters, frequently slipping and falling, surrounded by his ministers, army officers and Brahmins. The distraught king approached his son's room. When he heard Kritadyuti wailing and saw her cradling Harshashoka's lifeless body, he fell unconscious. His hair and dress scattered. His ministers wiped his forehead with wet cloths and placed smelling salts to his nostrils. Regaining consciousness, his breath labored and his eyes bleared with tears, he took his son's lifeless body into his arms. Verses 52 and 53. Seeing her grief-stricken husband rocking Harshashoka's limp body, Queen Kritadyuti's own grief increased, and she lamented loudly. Hearing her plaintive cries overwhelmed the palace's staff's heart with pain. The garland of flowers which had decorated her head lay scattered and her hair was in disarray. Eyeliner streaked her face, and her breast was wet with tears and covered with red turmeric powder. She cried melodically, resembling the calls of an osprey. Verse 54. Alas, she cried, "O Providence, O Creator, you are certainly inept. Otherwise, how is it during the lifetime of a father you have caused the death of his son? Such an act directly opposes your own laws. You lack mercy and are our enemy, since you whimsically contradict your own laws." She broke down, sobbing loudly. Her intimate maids in waiting tried to comfort her. "O gentle lady, do not blame God. This misfortune is not his doing. This is happening by the law of karma." Verse 55. Kritadyuti shrugged them off. I do blame him. Turning her face to the heavens, she wailed, O Lord, if you say there is no law, that a father must die in the lifetime of his son, and a son must be born in the lifetime of his father, that all this depends on karma, then I ask you, if karma is so strong and that everything depends on it, what need is there for you, the supreme controller? You may say you have to enforce the laws of karma because the material energy cannot do so by herself. Then answer me this. You have created bonds of affection between parents and their children. Why do you foolishly disturb those bonds? Do you not understand that if people realize the pain involved in loving their children, they will withhold their love out of fear of being hurt? Without their parents' affection, how will children survive? You are certainly a fool for creating such a faulty system. The queen again broke down sobbing, her body racked with grief. Chitraketu was inconsolable. He sat on the floor, rocking back and forth, embracing his son's lifeless body and moaning in pain. Verse 56, Kritadyuti took her son's limp hand in her own. My dear son, in your absence, I am overpowered by grief. Please do not leave me. Just look at your poor father, see his pain. What shall we do if you leave us? Without a son, we will have to suffer in hell. We hoped you would grow big and strong and one day do our pinda and thus rescue us from the nether regions. Therefore, my dear son, do not go any further with that merciless Yamraj. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed pitifully. Verse 57, after a few moments, she stroked his dangling legs. My dear son, you have slept a long time. Now please get up. Your playmates are calling you to play. You must be hungry. Come to your mother and suck my breast. Let us again be happy. Again she fainted with grief. Verse 58, when she regained consciousness, she leaned against Chitraketu's shoulder and gazed at her lifeless son's face. My dear son, I am most unfortunate, for I will never again see you smile. You have closed your eyes forever. You have gone to another planet, and I will never again hear your pleasing voice. Verses 59 and 60. Hearing this, Chitraketu's own grief erupted. He bawled uncontrollably, seeing the woeful condition of the king and queen. All the courtiers, both male and female, also sobbed loudly, drowned in an ocean of grief. When news reached the citizens of their prince's death, everyone in the kingdom became practically unconscious with sorrow. Verse 61. Meanwhile, the great sage Angira was traveling with his friend Narad. When he saw a vision within his heart of the entire scene, seeing that Angira's face had become very grave, Narad said, What troubles you, my friend? Let us go immediately to the kingdom of Surasen. I will tell you everything on the way. So it was a very sad chapter, and we will continue reading from the next chapter, which will be instructions from the sages. So on this note, thank you for joining in this reading. Hariyam Tat Sat. Hare Krishna. And I wish you all a very happy Vaisakhi, Poila, Vaisak, Vishu, Bihu, and all the other names it is known as. Hare Krishna.